John Calvin published the Christian Institute in April 1536, at the age of 26. This is the most precious and eternal book in Christian literature, a masterpiece of intellectual, spiritual depth, and ability. Calvin's book made Protestant ideas more global than Luther's. It was terrific that they systematically organized their religious beliefs and political confidence at a young age, provided it to the world, and boldly solved several fundamental problems. The book gradually grew thicker after 23 years of research and experience until it published the first edition and published the final edition in 1559. Still, the initial idea remained unchanged over time. That's because he stood firm in the truth of the Bible from the beginning. Calvin emphasized the sovereignty of God and the authority of the Bible. I can tell for sure just by looking through this book. He presents his book as an authoritative guide to the correct interpretation of the Bible. The most important of Calvin's central ideas was that they brought a coherent and unified theological system out of the Bible. He was thoroughly positive that he could defend his faith based on the Bible. Calvin's most significant asset to Protestantism is not doctrine but that it has proved that the Bible can be the basis for a solid understanding of the faith and structure of Christianity. Calvin's preface to this book shows two purposes to Calvin's forced writing of Christianity. The first, for practical purposes, was to interpret the doctrine of Christianity as simply as possible and as organized as possible to make it easier for those who explore Christianity. John Calvin begins chapter 1 of Christian Coercion concerning knowledge of God and knowledge of ourselves. Calvin divides knowledge into learning about God and learning about ourselves. Almost all the wisdom we have, true and healthy wisdom, consists of two parts. One is knowledge about God, and the other is knowledge about ourselves. These two pieces of knowledge are inseparable. However, humans who know human beings to know God cannot truly adore God until they hate themselves by realizing their misery. That's why our understanding of ourselves wakes us up and finds God. Not only that, but it also leads us to discover God. Calvin says that no one can look at himself without staring at God. Knowledge of God leads to understanding man, and knowledge of man leads to knowledge of God. If you do not know yourself, you do not know God. You do not know yourself without knowing God. And chapter 2 tells us that knowledge of God leads to reverence. We will talk about this later. Chapter 3 proves an undeniable sense of God in the human mind. He says, anyone with sound judgment will always be convinced that there is a perception of God that can never be erased in the human mind. People try to deny this ritual and drive it out, but when humans do not reach the knowledge they know God in the knowledge they know God, they deviate from the law of God's creation. Calvin says that the best happiness of the soul is the likeness of God. When this soul grabs knowledge about God, it turns entirely into the shape of God, and only worshipping God makes a man better than the beast, and only through this service does man long for immortality. Chapter 4 shows that this knowledge is partly ignorance, partly choking or corrupt by malice. Experience tells us that God planted the seeds of religion in everyone. However, the origins of this religion do not reach to know God through knowledge but commit the folly of portraying God in their way with speculation and imagination. In this way, they denied the sense of God that humans originally had, distorted it as they like, and degenerated it into a means to satisfy their needs. Even at these times, they are not impressed by the voluntary fear of fearing God's dignity, but rather enslave and forced fear forced by God's judgment. Chapter 5 says that knowledge of God shines in the creation of the universe and its continued rule. To confront God without taking it seriously is to go on a path of self-destruction. This is true of believers as well as unbelievers. Even if a man cannot fully know God, a life that does not pursue the knowledge he knows and follows God only with his thoughts is also an act that goes against God's will. Calvin says, man has a factory beautifully decorated with God's countless ministry, and at the same time a warehouse full of immeasurable wealth. Therefore, even though the man deserves to praise God, he flatters himself with arrogance. So let us remember that every time we see ourselves, there is one God to rule all over nature, to have us look at Him, to direct our faith in God, and to worship God and to call God's name. Because while we enjoy the fantastic gift that proves the divine nature, there is nothing more unreasonable as we despise the Creator who enriched this gift. Despite the clear evidence of God's creation and redemption, our stupidity does not benefit from the evidence. And He commits a sin of exchanging the glory of God that will not decay with the rotten shapes. No matter how much humans experience such clear evidence of the existence of God, they go to the pursuit of false divinity unless they take the path of worshiping God. It was no exception to a brilliant person like Plato. Whether humans seek false divinity or philosophy, all of this is, as Calvin said, they are creating a smokescreen for human ignorance to hide their profanity.